So if you're a normal person, today is New Year's and I'd like to wish you a happy New Year's. If you're a chess player, it's the final day of the World Blitz Championship 2024. In the winner's bracket, that is today, we got Hans Niemann versus Magnus playing their match. Who's going to win? The rivalry does not need to be explained. We're going to look at key moments from two decisive games and then the final game, the sudden death game, that determined the winner of the match in its entirety. So, game one, Magnus plays in English, 99% from both sides, easy draw. Then in game two, something very interesting happens. Hans is winning, but in this position, Magnus goes rook to d6, and Hans mates him in one move. You don't see Magnus getting mated in one move every day. I wonder if Hans has ever been checkmated by Magnus. I don't know. But Magnus has been checkmated by Hans. Now Hans is up 1.5 to a half. He only needs a draw to win the match. Crazy. Plus, you just got checkmated. I mean, how do you bounce back from that? You could be the world's champion for the longest time ever. That is Magnus. We get this position, which is pretty balanced. Minute and a half to minute and a half. It's black to move. What should you do as black in this position? White is better coordinated. You are blockading this isolated passed pawn. So what Hans had to do is just sit on the position, let Magnus come to him, and then figure it out, because Magnus needs to win. So he's going to need to play risky chess to win. Instead, we got Hans playing risky chess. We got knight to a2, which loses the game. His idea was that if bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, this is a balanced position. You now have a passed pawn. You have a bishop versus knight on an open board. You have a little bit of a gross pawn structure, but the bishop makes up for it. What else could he have calculated? Well, maybe he calculated bishop takes, queen takes. And here, the coordination for black is quite good. And again, this is a passed pawn. White is a little bit better due to the pawn structure, but there are chances for black. However, Magnus plays the cool, calm, collected queen to d3. He's like, you're not winning my queen. I'm getting out of the way. And in chess, such subtle moves are vicious. It's really quite interesting. Look, what's the difference? Well, if you get bishop takes, queen takes check, you do not lose the knight because there is queen f7 guarding it. Guarding it? What happened to my voice there? You'd get queen a6 hitting the rook. And after the rook saves itself, white is super well coordinated. So Magnus went on to win this game. And then we get to the final game, the tiebreaker, the game decider. Who's going to win? We get e4, e5. We get an Italian. We get d3. I've seen Magnus and Fabiano play this hundreds of times. I mean, not hundreds. That's a little bit of a exaggeration. But Magnus is very good at these positions with black. But Fabiano is very good with them as white. But this is not that game, or that match, rather. So we get a6, allowing for b5, allowing for bishop a7, whereas it is a sniper rifle, as seen in that Khan video from yesterday, if you guys saw that. Knight to d2, the infamous knight d2, knight f1 route, knight g3 or h2, pressing for g4, pressing for a kingside attack. Rook e8, knight f1. And then we get knight g3, the bishop goes to e6. You get the trade where you could take with the pawn or the rook. Rook is slightly better in this position. And then what to do here. I'm sure Magnus has played this thousands of times. The main moves are b4 and queen to b3. But in this game, we get pawn to d4, striking in the center right away. Do not get forked. Now, I'm not sure why Magnus did not play d5 because he does love these types of positions. You get the complex square in the position. The better calculator will win. Maybe he forgot some of his lines and it's not a position you want to play where you don't remember your lines. Because basically anybody else that plays this would lose on both ends of the board. So he plays the passive rook e8, but still theory, bishop to e3. And then something strange starts to happen. Look at the times. It's 2.5, 2.5. Magnus spends a minute on this move. And now it's 1.5 minutes to 2.5 minutes. And Hans is still in his prep. We get queen to b3 aiming at the king, aiming at the pawn on b7. You get two centralized pawns. And now white is completely done with development. And black is just tied down and his pieces are aiming at nothing. We get rook to e6, shutting down the queen. Maybe he wants to go on the 6th rank. Maybe he wants to play defense. Maybe he wants to double or triple up. Now, for the life of me, I do not know why. Actually, it's not yet. But Hans could play e5 right now. He goes queen c2, queen c1. Sorry about that. Aiming at h6. aiming at the weakness that was created. Magnus defends it. Now, for the life of me, your opponent has 40 seconds on the clock. Not even. Why do you not play e5? I don't understand. Did he not want to open up the bishop? But you get so much counterplay. Wherever the knight goes, you jump your other knight into the position. Yes, you open up the bishop, but this knight is pinned. This pawn is a beauty. If this knight ever moves, there's knight f6. I mean, it just looks like black is going to lose. How do you defend this with 39 seconds? I don't think you do. But instead, Hans goes queen f4. He must have had an idea. I don't know what that was. But you see, we're going to get a worse version of what he could have gotten. We got knight h4. I guess Hans was going for checkmate because he's like, my opponent has no time. How is he going to hold this with 20 seconds? But it is Magnus at the end of the day. He plays king h7 in 1 second. Right? Some people would play g5 in 1 second and just lose the game to a fork. But that's not him. He's not that guy. So he goes king h7. Hans goes back. Magnus gets Alekhine's gun on the e-file, and we get pawn to e5 now. As you can see by the bar, it's not as good because Magnus is tripled up. So he's well defended against this strike. He jumps into the hole that was created by letting go of e4. We get queen to g4, but there's not such a big attack anymore. Bishop to b8. Now the bishop strikes on the open file. Is Hans going to get back rank checkmated? In an alternate universe, he can. We get rook takes, queen takes. Magnus is trying to simplify because he's down on time. So vice versa. Hans is not going to simplify because he's up on time. Magnus is like, I insist. And now you basically have to. You might be like, why can't he go queen g4? Well, then you would get f5, and actually the queen is just trapped. You need to sack the knight, and that is not enough counterplay. So we get the trade, and why is black winning? Pause the video. What are all the factors that make black winning? Sorry about that. Well, white has an isolated pawn that black is blockading. So check, one principle covered. Black has a bishop on an open board, so that's going to benefit him as well. And while Hans tries to consolidate, Magnus brings his king closer, and then he gets his rook on the second. So he's done absolutely everything right. Right? Magnus is known to be surgical in endgames, and that is what he does. Hans is trying to boot the rook out, trying to get his pieces mobilized. But again, this pawn is the bane of white's existence. His pieces are just tied down. He did get some counterplay, and he's still up a minute, where he could have had a chance to play knight a5, posing questions to the queen side. If the pawn's pushed, you weaken the structure. So Magnus would need to defend like this, the rook x-rays. But then you get b4, and at least now you're freezing c5. You can route your knight back to b3, where everything is defended. Maybe he could have held this to a draw, and then there would have been another game, 2.5, 2.5. But instead, Hans goes back. Magnus goes forward, Hans goes back. Doesn't sound good, does it? Okay, Hans activates his king, because it is the best piece in the endgame. But on the d-file, there is a pin, and Magnus will exploit it at the right time like he does. He trades off, so okay, you lost your biggest weakness, which was your isolated pawn, but the board has become more open, and who benefits from that? The guy with the bishop, the guy whose name is Magnus. We get knight to g5, asking questions, okay, a little bit of passive defense, anticipating knight e4, the fork. We get another check. Now it's kind of just annoying. You're like, stop checking me, dude. Now he's aiming at b2. Hans goes knight f3. He's like, I do not want to lose one of my minor pieces in the center of the board. Magnus gives a check, picks up a pawn. I wonder how many of these moves were just psychological. And as you can see by the time, Hans is down to 6 seconds because it's a very hard position to play. When there's a bishop versus no bishop on an open board, yikes. We got g5 expansion on the king side. Do not do this with your pawns because it's just not a good pawn structure. None of the pawns defend each other. g4, but now you have two backwards pawns. Magnus jumps into the outpost, aiming at the base of the pawn chain. We get rook to e1, okay, sacking some pawns for some activity. Again, surgical, pushing the king over to the corner of the board. The rook is on the third. It's just about GG's, but again, Hans is essentially playing on increment. Magnus picks up 2 pawns. Hans is going to get some pawns on the queen side, but at the end of the day, Magnus has 2 pawns on the king side that are both passers, and it's just not what you want. All right, setting up a discovery, but the king marches forward. It just looks losing, and it is. Rook to b2 check, knight to e2 check. Is Hans going to get mated? No. We get a knight trade, a simplification, but again, open board bishop. I won't say it again. Another thing that's bad for white is his passed pawn is being guarded from the side. Magnus is attacking it from behind. Who's going to stop these guys? Knights are not the greatest at stopping past pawns. Right? Play knight and pawn endgames like pawn endgames, even though this is not that. All right? Check. Back. But this is simply just winning for black because he has 2 passed pawns and white's passed pawn cannot be stopped. We got a couple more moves. Hans tries bringing in the king, but there are a lot of squares on the A file, so the distance from the king to the rook is just simply not enough. Magnus pushes his pawn, and in this position, Hans resigns because he's going to make a queen, and he might make another queen. And when Hans sacks his rook for one of the pawns, there's going to be a queen, and if you do the quick math, black will just be winning. So Magnus gets through. I cannot imagine how pissed Hans is. He would have been so hyped had he won. He would have had something to say for sure. But his time is not yet, but still a great tournament. So a great match. The tournament's not over, so I don't know who won. Who do you think's going to win? You probably know by the time you're watching this video. Thank you guys as always for watching. Happy New Year's once again. Have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow. Boom.